What are the green flags of a co-founder relationship?
Transparent communication, trust, and respect.
Able to have difficult conversations and aligned on core values.
Stress resilience, great work ethic.
Red flags.
Imbalance of power and poor communication.
Lack of commitment, unwillingness to learn and to listen.
Speaks badly about you in rooms that you're not in and doesn't think of your best interests in situations where they should do.
Hi, you are listening to Woman in the Building, a podcast from the Aurora Tech Award, which is the global award for female founders in emerging markets. My name is Bella. I am the head of the award and the host of this podcast. And here we talk about the reality of building as a woman in emerging markets, sharing unfiltered stories and lessons that apply to the context that you are building in. And today we're talking about one of the biggest killers of businesses, which is co-founder fallout. Like any relationship, and I'm sure we've all had our fair few, co-founding is hard and it takes a lot of work. And very few partnerships actually last happily or long-term. And that's why a lot of founders choose to remain solopreneurs. So in today's episode, we are bringing together a serial founder, a lawyer, and an investor to help you understand what makes a co-founder relationship work, what should you be watching out for before it breaks, and how can you protect yourself from the beginning in case it does.
There was a business that I was running. We were growing really fast. We had an interview with Y Combinator, but unfortunately through that period, I realized that it wasn't the right co-founder for me. And so that really derailed everything. And despite growing 50% week on week, I had to restart the business because I didn't have a contract in place.
Our first guest is Preeti Mohan, and Preeti is a multi-time founder herself and someone who works closely with other founders through her projects like Face to Face, which is a community of more than 600 female entrepreneurs, and her other company called Nice Too, which is all about supporting underrepresented founders in startups and tech.
Preeti, you're not the only person. You know, it's one of these things where when you're first starting a business and everything's going full throttle and you're excited and everyone's like, oh, we're going to build this great company, we're going to get into YC. The last thing people think about is contracts. Genuinely, we get a case every week on this topic.
The second guest is Patricia Wing, a qualified corporate lawyer and second-time founder. Her startup, Suli, is a smart legal platform for startups and small-medium enterprises.
But even from a personal perspective, I've had a co-founder relationship that ended really badly. And luckily, I did have the legal protection in place. We had those conversations saying, it's fine, nothing's going to happen, it's going to be okay, you know, we're going to do this forever, you know, it's like marriage that was started.
Yeah, that's true. We always compare those co-founder relationships to marriage or to dating. And this is so funny that we're all super excited at the beginning and there's like nothing in place to protect us as co-founders.
And finally, Eugenia Dunaiva. You might remember her from the episode where we talked about how women raise capital. Eugenia is a partner at DVC, which is a San Francisco-based VC firm, and she will be bringing the investor's perspective, someone who quite literally bets on people and their partnerships. So, how do you pick the right co-founder? How do you build the trust from day one? And how do you navigate taboos like contracts and financials and equity? So let's dive in. I get that it sounds pessimistic, right? Putting in place a contract, like what if it all goes wrong? But at the same time, what is the alternative of like not putting in a contract and then it does go wrong and then you lose everything? And so when you're actually trying to explain to a co-founder why that contract should be in place without it becoming personal, like how do you do that?
I think from my perspective, like I help a lot of founders start their businesses and help establish their businesses. And one of the first things I say is do a co-founder agreement, because what it does is it takes the emotion out of the decision. Otherwise, it can get very messy and emotional. And that's the last thing you need when things aren't working.
I would say the top things are, number one, you're both entering into the contract. So it's not a personal thing, it's something you're both doing. And also you don't have to always put it onto one person pushing the decision. It's actually, as an investor, in any case, if you're looking for investors, the investors will force you to have it. And hey, this founders agreement will be replaced anyway when we do a funding round, because founder agreements are replaced at a funding round. So that's kind of what I'd always say to people. You shouldn't make it personal, you should make it contingent on this fundraising round.
The way I talk to founders about setting up everything legally correct and right is the way of not each of them protecting each other, but the way I frame it is that, you're protecting your business from any other co-founders that join later, from investors, like the world basically. And that makes them way more engaged and way more committed, sort of, because they think, okay, that's our baby. We are growing it here. We want to protect it.
Okay, let's touch on a few of the context, right? Because there's not just the co-founder dynamics when you start. There's also the co-founder dynamics when someone joins later. It's like, how do you navigate that? And like, how many shares should they get? And that's a whole different conversation.
It's like valuations, right? Valuations, it's how do we decide the valuation of a company? Well, it's pretty much how much someone is willing to pay for it. That's in the early days, that's a definition of valuation. When you think of co-founders' share dynamics, it's a similar principle, right? It's, what is your bargaining power? Have you already, made 200, 300, 400, 500,000 in revenue? Have you already secured big deals? Have you already done all the work? Is the product built? And there's a few different metrics you can use. Like, for example, Y Combinator considers a co-founder someone with minimum 10%. But I would say in all cases, if you have a co-founder who you've built a really good relationship with and you're like, I believe in the success of us, and that person's not incentivized, then there's ways you can change that, right? So you can always issue them more shares as part of an option pool. That's something that a lot of people do. Giving someone more in the beginning is riskier, if I'm being completely honest. And I'm talking to the founder, not the company here. Because when you're speaking about legal, there's two types of representation. You can talk to the company or the founder, but this is really to the founder.
In terms of investor perspective, I myself, I normally invest early stage. So, it's not that messy at that stage normally. But of course, it's a huge red flag when we see that, example, there are two co-founders and one would have like 90% of equity and the other one 10% of equity. So that would definitely I'd ask like, what's happening here? What's the commitment of that other person who's only having 10% of equity? Is it that they are not working full time? Is it that they are, maybe not so essential as a co-founder to that business? And then it's even a bigger red flag, right? Because for me, as founder and investor, I look at, I consider co-founder only the person who is absolutely essential to building the MVP, right? And that's why we very rarely see co-founding chief commercial officers or chief revenue officers, right? And then those people would join later, and then it's up to the co-founding team to see how much equity they want to give people to actually incentivize them long term.
Just to touch on a point that Eugenia made, it's absolutely right. You need to think about this person. Are they a co-founder? Are they an early hire? Or are they an advisor? With co-founders, I think it's really important for you to be as close as possible in terms of equity, because ideally they should be complementary in the skills that they bring. And so they should be able to help you drive a lot of momentum. And they should have skin in the game to share the vision and go along with you on that journey, almost like an equal partner, even if there's a few percentages that are different.
And just to add on that point, Preeti, it's a really, really important point. And I'm working with a client right now, and she has someone working with her who is a good salesperson, but he's not really a co-founder. And what's really difficult is he wants to be a co-founder. He's even writing in pitch decks. He's writing to investors that he's a co-founder, which creates this legal problem as well. Be very careful about that. Be very clear up front what that person's title is and what their role is, because we give people bigger titles than they should have at that stage, right? Are they actually COO, or are they really just head of sales? I've probably dealt with 50 in the last 12 months of these situations. And there's patterns, he was my best friend. He came on holiday with me. Of course we were going to build this dream together. And then lo and behold, it's the worst dispute ever. And it gets so personal and so toxic. And, and they start stealing company data and locking you out of Google. And it just gets very messy. So yeah, it's interesting when you see these kind of correlations.
Well, we kind of moved into that. So that's what I was going to ask you guys next, which is what are the stages, or maybe what are the flags of a bad co-founder dynamic, whether at an early stage or a late stage? And then also what do you do when you're in that position?
I've seen from my perspective, a lot of co-founder relationships where they go wrong is where the expectation isn't set out from the beginning, right? It's one person still has a job. and the other person's working full time. And then so one person feels all the burden on them, the other person doesn't. And this is a really common theme that I found. Also, one person wants to build a unicorn, the other person wants like a monthly income. One person says they're a co-founder, yet they want to be paid more, they want to be paid a massive salary and not take any risk. It's just like imbalance in terms of commitment. One person is willing to go all in and do late nights. The other person's like, oh, I want to go out tonight with my friends. This is like a common thing that I found. Don't know about you, Eugene, Preeti.
Absolutely agree with that. Like an imbalance in what people bring to the table is definitely a red flag. Also, from the perspective of someone supporting founders and investing in founders, it's often a really big red flag when someone's constantly talking over the other person and wanting to dominate the conversation. It's a clear red flag that someone holds a bit more power than the other.
Yes, definitely. But I would say I see like 3 buckets of problems, right? So first one is relationship. Second one is roles and responsibilities and accountability. And third one is the one that we touched upon already is equity. So all the problems that happen normally would fall into one of those 3 buckets. I totally agree with a mismatch of sort of long-term vision and even exit strategy from the very beginning. And as they are in the situation themselves, they cannot see it because they are so kind of in their day-to-day and in the weeds of building the product right away. So sometimes you as an investor, as this observer, need to offer this perspective that, hey guys, maybe you want to have this conversation about where you see each other in 1, 3, 5 years.
In fact, it reminds me of one of the relationships I previously had. So we had all the alignment conversations, but obviously it's different talking versus actually being in the business and going ahead. And so we were building this product and it was a tech-enabled concierge for women's health. So that was the vision we both agreed on. And then all of a sudden, what happened is things ended up changing very rapidly on a weekly basis. And then the co-founder said, I want to build a manufacturing plant that makes products. And I was like, what? That's very different from what we've discussed. And mine was still the tech concierge. It is something that we could have worked through, but I kind of got an early indication because of my past experiences that when the vision differs so vastly, and it's going to make it hard to constantly have to align, especially when it's so far apart from each other.
Yeah, I agree. I think the earlier it starts, like you already understand that, hey, it's so early, we already have different visions. So the further you go, that's probably going to be more and more difficult then, right?
Exactly. I think there were also underlying things behind it. For example, they like making decisions rapidly and also their communication style isn't to take someone else along the journey. And so those are indications that they are better as a solo founder. So that was also a very valuable lesson.
I was going to pick up on something you said because I feel like both you and Eugene have mentioned this, and it's communication. And this feels like an obvious, of course, communication is important, but being able to communicate so openly and clearly and vulnerably with a co-founder, I think is the most important thing. I actually think about my own co-founder relationship, and even on a personal level, like communicating about really difficult things has been hard for me in the past, kind of growing up and things. But having a co-founder who speaks about problems straight away and has this like rule where let's discuss this right now, I'm not sleeping until we go through this, is so like comforting. And we have this rule where if we need to have like a difficult conversation, we say, can we have a founder catch up? Only her and I know, now everyone knows. But only we know that this means that we need to like put our guards down and not like be egotistic, not, make other person feel bad, and create this safe space to have a difficult conversation.
Absolutely. The 3 values that I cannot compromise on for co-founders, and this is what I tell the founders I work with as well, is clear, transparent communication, trust, and respect. If you don't have these fundamental 3 values, it will at some point break down.
True. I've seen also I've noticed that it's very difficult sometimes for co-founders that just met each other, for example, in an incubator or in any startup program, to actually like weed each other out in that sense, because it's really difficult to trust a person that you know for a couple of weeks. Like, how can you do it? And obviously every like incubator, they would offer you this, like go through the values exercise or go through a framework. I don't know, any personality, how do you call those things?
The personality quizzes.
Tests, sort of. Yes. So, the Clifton Strength, the MBTI, it does help to kind of objectively understand where on the spectrum, like this, so that person is, like, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses and how do we complement each other? But still, as an investor, I totally prefer the founders that knew each other for some time before they actually started the business. I think it's super important for the co-founding team to actually see each other through stress. So knowing how resilient each of them is a huge advantage.
Would you say the way to build a strong co-founder relationship is to go through difficult things? And okay, I'm not saying you have to go through trauma to do this, but I feel like there are ways that you can do this, such as going hiking, picking a really difficult mountain, see how he or she behaves. Does she give you her last chocolate bar? Does she eat it for herself? Like this, the kind of test that I'll put. I remember there was a situation where, I won't go into too much detail, but it happened recently. It was very embarrassing, very horrible. And I have to be honest, to shout out my co-founder, the way she dealt with it, I was like, wow, like you are amazing in crises. Like I need this kind of person in my life because it was not a great situation for me. Someone doesn't tell you, this is your fault that things went wrong. That is like for me a massive red flag. I always tell clients as well, when you're thinking about a co-founder relationship, don't go straight into like, we're co-founders. Do it for 6 months. Be like, if you've started the company and someone's joining you, make them an advisor or consultant. See how you can even work with them before signing on a dotted line, before bringing them in as a co-founder. Test the waters for, at least 3 months, I would say. Yeah.
I think that's where the vesting schedule and the cliff come in. So like having a 3 or 6 month cliff followed by a 3 or 4 year vesting schedule where they obviously have to work in the business for that duration to be able to earn their shares. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And just to maybe circle back, on the initial question that Bella asked, it's ability to actually accept feedback and ability to listen, not only talk, right? Not only communicate, but actually listen on what's happening, and willingness to learn as well. A willingness to learn also like from you, from co-founders, from investors, from the market. And the biggest also green flag for me as for an investor would be co-founders that built one startup, exited, and then are together again building the second one. That's like a very, very good scenario that everyone would want to invest in. Like people will be lining up to do that.
I think some of the things that I see a lot is, well, I see it through my friends actually, where they're talking about their co-founder, they did this, and, and they wouldn't have made that decision. They didn't ask me, and, what are they even doing? I don't even know what they're doing, blah, blah. And then I hear them on a call and it's like, oh, how are you? Like, yeah, everything's fine. That does not sound good. You know what I'm saying? Because if you feel so resentful, it's like, I don't know, like, how do you solve that?
Very funny. It's often that those kind of situations that they don't come to the investors, right? It's very often that we only see the result of it, the actual fallout, which is a shame. Because again, the common scenario is that there are 2 co-founders, right? If there's 3, that there's completely different dynamic because it's often a situation of 2 versus 1. And, if there's 4 plus, I have my questions around that, but because that's even more relationship complexity there in the game. But again, if there's this situation of misunderstanding or people lacking communication simply because, for example, they're first-time founders, they are really young people. I always say that, hey, bring in the mediator. Like I can be this mediator. There can be a professional person. There can be a coach, but bring in someone who has more experience in such situations so that they could guide you through it.
We have a few of our clients who have coaches, actually, Eugenia, founder coaches. It's also like counseling, isn't it? When you say, oh, I go to counseling, it's like, oh, you've got problems, you've got issues. But actually, I see it the opposite way. Do you take counseling when you're broken, or do you take counseling to not get there? And I think it's the same with your co-founder relationship. I really do see it in the same way. You're entering this relationship as individuals. And so each of you will have your own trauma, your own issues, your own problems. And when you come together, those problems will exemplify, they'll become bigger and bigger. And so actually, I think there's individual work that will need to be done. And I definitely agree, you can have a coach or a counselor to can help you work for any issues or even take out individually.
I completely agree. And I think like some of these things where you say something behind someone's back and then you're acting in a way where everything is absolutely perfect is so common, especially if you've come from a toxic corporate culture.
Yeah.
And what it kind of boils down to is that you haven't built a speak up culture in your organization. So I think it's important to do the work, first of all, for yourself and do the work together afterwards in a simple conversation, because sometimes it's the smallest thing and it's boiling and it becomes bigger and it's something that's entirely preventable.
Preeti, you touched on a very interesting subject right now. I think is a co-founder as a job. Because we tend to think that, co-founder and CEO, so that's a person, who runs the organization, the sales, and there's the CTO. But then co-founder is also someone who builds the culture as the company grows. And also co-founder is someone who represents the company externally as well and sort of spreads this culture out, building also the HR brand of the company to hire great talent afterwards, to, build the company brand to clients, partners, and so on and so forth. And I think this is one of the criteria also that needs to be used. Will this person be representing us, our values, our culture? Will he or she be building this culture together with me in the way that I see it? There was a startup that came pitched to us. They were in health tech, a man and a woman, and they actually found each other throughout the pandemic online. So they have never met offline. And they did it very right. They actually spoke about their values, and because they are in health tech. And then I think it was 8 or 9 months later when they actually met in person, the female co-founder discovered that her male co-founder was actually a heavy smoker, which for her was unacceptable. And they did split in the end, right? So they did realize that there is values mismatch.
Actually, doing a values workshop exercise is so useful as co-founders. So what I have done in the past is done it together. And sometimes there's a bit of agreement that happens just by default to make it feel it's all friendly. So in fact, doing the exercise separately and then coming together and work together is really important, because then the real values that people want to bring to the company, and then you'll see how many of those align or not.
So you're starting your co-founder relationship. What are the things that you do so you can prevent any future fallout? We've discussed the legal agreements, the value questions. What would you guys add to that list?
Yeah, I think what comes out of values is actually your set of guiding principles. It can be, an official document. Actually, I do recommend setting it up this way, because then this document would serve you as a sort of filter in any decision-making process that you have. Are we making the thing according to what we've decided, how we act? And also, I actually recommend, it can be part of the legal setup as well, but have another document that I call personally what ifs. What happens if one of us gets sick? What happens if one of us needs to cut the working hours? How do we act in those situations? Obviously, you cannot cover, 100% of scenarios, but still going through these scenarios actually also, helps you learn more about your co-founder and their way of thinking, and you work out together the way you would tackle those situations. So that helps as well.
From a legal perspective, the way to protect yourself is making sure that everything is done underneath the company umbrella. If you're starting out the company, you have this great name. It's oh, I love Bella. I want to trademark it. I want to protect the name. You go online, you do bella.com. Now, what I've seen so many times is a founder will do this. They will do it in their personal name. Things go wrong, the founder takes the name. Yeah, and to get back a domain name is very, very difficult. Even if you have proof and things like that, to enforce it costs a lot of money. So making sure that your trademark, your domain name, anything you do is in the company name. Making sure that every payment is done for a business bank account. Don't do personal transactions. It just creates a whole lot of complication. Making sure that at the beginning of the company, please listen to this, each founder signs a founder IP assignment agreement. This means that anything the founders create belongs to the company. So important you do this. Why? Because if you don't do this, there's an argument that the founder owns the IP. The founder owns the IP and they leave, you're buggered. It really does affect the business. We spoke about co-founder agreements, as Preeti mentioned as well, making sure they have vesting in place from the start. A way to capture like the roles and responsibilities of each founder is put it into a founder service agreement, formalize it, agree what the role is, agree what the expectation is. And you can have both of you have to authorize someone to close down Google. Both of you have to authorize someone take a large amount of money out of the bank account. You can have these protections in place. If things do go wrong, the company's not going to fall down and crash. I see it all the time. Someone just hacks a code and then takes it to China or South Africa, no one can get, and it's like, oh my God.
To add to that, apart from having the strong legal backgrounds, I have a co-founder questionnaire that I give to founders. And so it goes through things like, do you have complementary skills? And so there are a number of questions that look through that and address the clarity around roles and responsibilities. The next one is about the mission and vision alignment, because as we spoke about before, it's so important to make sure you're heading down the same path and it's an aligned path. And then are the areas of interest aligned? That's so important, especially when, most companies pivot and they go in different directions. So is the problem you're solving always going to be the same? Are you going to look at other interest areas or things like that? Personality fit, whether you're able to spend 14 hours with someone at a stretch. The next one's working style and commitment. How much time are you spending on the business? What happens when someone has to step away? And then the last one is practicalities. So actually doing the exercise of what are your co-founder red flags? Where's your startup going to be based? Does remote working work? So things like that. And then apart from these questions, when you're establishing a business, to Trisha's point before, you need to have a password manager to both have access to it and be able to access the tools, resources, the repositories that you need to, as well as documentation of budgets and financial reports. So there's transparency from the beginning.
So I think we can move on to the next thing, the specifics of co-founder dynamics. So are women more likely to have co-founders? Are men more likely to, I don't know if you guys have seen some pattern recognitions or spouses that are co-founders. Do you see any patterns of things that have worked well, things that have not worked well? Yeah.
And in Australia, in fact, the majority, I think about 70% of the unicorns are either founded by spouses or siblings.
No way.
And if you look at that, it's probably because they know each other for a long time. They know how to work through problems. And there's a fundamental groundwork built on trust. Now, coming to the thing about women having co-founders or men having co-founders, in our program, we've graduated with this cohort. It'll be about 140 or so women over 1.5 years. And out of that, only 3% had co-founders. I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it, but something we actively tell the women in our program is that it's important to find co-founders to start a business with, because as one person, you can only get so far. But as 2 or 3 people, you can go so much faster. So it's really strange. And I have a hypothesis that, especially because we look at a lot of tech companies, and it's because there are more men in tech jobs as well and less women. So the circles that they surround them with aren't the ones that they continue on to co-founder relationships, which is what we see with men. They're often ex-Canva, ex-Atlassian, which are some Australian unicorns, and they tend to form businesses together.
It's definitely not as drastic as you said, here in Europe, in terms of, unicorns being funded by spouses or siblings. That's new to me. That's really interesting about Australia. In terms of patterns that I see, a lot more, startups that come out of incubators or accelerators, they tend to have more mixed teams. I think that is thanks to the fact that accelerators and incubators themselves, they try to foster this diversity and inclusion, which is great. At the same time, in terms of how male versus female founders choose their co-founders, I see women being a lot more focused on how well they click, on how well they will be able to work with the founding team, regardless whether it's, a male co-founder that they are looking for or another female co-founder that they are looking for. Aside of gender, I see some dynamic conflict that very often arises is at the very, very early stage when we're just building the product. CTO feels that they are very much in charge of everything, right? Because there's nothing at that stage apart from the product. Whereas further on, when, the product is built and it's time to sell it, it's time to fundraise a second round, CEO is then having more power. So this kind of power dynamic between the CTO and the CEO, like this is something that you need to navigate really carefully so that CTO still has their playground. And then another funny thing that I see male co-founding teams looking for a female co-founder to join their team. I see this as a trend, and I haven't answered yet the question whether it's indeed that they look for diversity of opinions in the team, or they actually want to have the female co-founder as a token. We are a female co-founded startup. We can apply for, special funding like governmental grants, support for female founders, and so on and so forth. I actually got invited a couple of times to be a co-founder of startups, and both times it was exactly, a male co-founding team that approached me saying, hey, you tick so many checkboxes, which I do indeed. I don't know if you have this experience with femwashing in this space, ladies.
I've definitely seen it and heard it several times before, and it's funny, and I don't know if it's just me being cynical, but Australia used to have some grants for female founders, which were basically, it'll match any other external funding 1-to-1. And when that was happening, surprisingly, people were looking for more female founders. But then there are still a few who actually do seek out diversity of thought and perspective. So I think part of it is related to the other incentives that exist in market, and part of it is actually people wanting to do the right thing.
It's interesting. I mean, I resonate with what you're saying. And even from my own perspective, we look for more men in the team to create this different feeling, because if we're all women, you're going to get the same kind of feeling, right? But having this kind of masculine or male energy is, I think, a very positive thing. And just to come back to your point, Bella, around how you see co-founder relationships where people are married or together or related. I've seen both sides. So I've seen one of the best co-founder relationships. They were so good together. But that's because, with all due respect, their marriage was quite successful. So I feel like it's one of the same. From a DD perspective, I've worked on transactions where it does come up that they're married, and investors, have questioned it, have looked, well, what are the steps you put in place if things go wrong? Like, how will you deal with things if things go wrong? And it's one of the things that just add like a star on your name, so like to be aware of.
I mean, just to add very quickly there, I had an arranged marriage and I've been married now almost 15 years, but I've told my husband I'll never start a business with him just because that's all we'll discuss like 24/7. So I've said, no, we're never going to be co-founders.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a really quick blitz. You don't have enough equity. What do you do?
Ideally, you asked that question actually before realizing that you have not enough equity. You are a first-time founder. If you do not have enough experience in this conversation, I recommend going to someone who is either an advisor of a startup at this stage or someone who can help you have this conversation.
I would say negotiate where you feel it's not just. And when you negotiate, you should come with benchmarks and say, if I can contribute to raising this amount of money, if I can secure this B2B deal, I find people who just ask for more, and you're not understanding the point. Like, you have to provide value. It's quite hard for someone to say no when you're adding more value to the business.
And then flip side, like, you've been in the business for a while and you've decided you can't work anymore. What are your routes from that point that are fair to you as well?
I'd say this is also a negotiation, but this is more of a legal one, actually.
If you are planning to leave, you need to think about what is your minimum that you would leave for. Like, what is your global. This may be shares, this may be cash, this may be your name on the door and like rights to, you know, come to events or whatever it is for you. You have to think about that. In terms of the legal documents, of course, if you have a founder's agreement and you've left after 12 months, you normally would keep hold of some of those shares. If you leave before 12 months, normally with standard wording, you would lose those shares. So that's something to think about. I would say negotiation is always better when you're on good terms. So try to keep it on good terms for as long as possible. If you find that your co-founder is just not budging and they're not working with you in any way, then there are things you can do like arbitration and mediation, where you can go for a system where the person is completely unbiased. As a company, so talking about the company here, you want to make sure that if a co-founder is leaving, you have a settlement agreement or some kind of agreement that ties up the whole arrangement together. And do get legal advisors involved in this process, because it's not just as simple as transferring someone's shares. And the worst thing you can do is not do the documentation correctly, go towards an investment round, and this person still have shares in the company. That would mess you up a lot.
So anything else that you guys would like to add, considering the context here, as someone is probably listening to this because they're thinking they need a co-founder, but they're skeptical about whether it's the right decision. I think a lot of those people sometimes are women, because I think we think worst case scenario. I mean, in my experience, it's just my pattern recognition.
Yeah, I'd probably give one advice to people who think who are contemplating whether they need a co-founder or they don't. And especially, as you said, to women, because we tend to, you know, have this imposter syndrome and think whether we are able to do it at all or we are not. If you have an idea, if you know that you can make this idea happen on your own, you do not need a co-founder. Absolutely not. As I said, co-founder needs to be someone who is essential to building the MVP. If you can do it on your own, fair enough. Just do it on your own. There's nothing wrong with it. And then one thing and one trend that I saw recently, and I definitely wouldn't invest in a company like this, is when there are co-founders, but they are also co-CEOs, for instance. For me, that's literally a ticking bomb. So that's a slow burn dynamic of ego clash potentially, when people couldn't figure out who wants to what in a startup, and potentially that there's no good fit in terms of their skills. There's an overlap. So maybe there's a need for them to find for either other businesses or other co-founders to work with.
I think one of the questions I get asked a lot is, it's harder for a solo co-founder to raise funding. In fact, double as hard according to the stats. So should I get a co-founder or not? And I think that's completely the wrong way to approach it. I think it is important to consider that with a co-founder, you can go further, as I mentioned before. For example, if you are a specialist in commercial areas, and let's say you're doing a health startup, and having someone who's a domain expert in health, and then maybe a CTO who specializes in AI, that is a killer team. And that is a team that will take you a lot further than trying to work and figure out everything by yourself. But having said all of that, it is hard to find the right co-founder. So I think it's important to put in groundwork to understand one another and get the dynamic working before committing.
The last thing I'll leave you with is think of your relationship like going to the gym. I think sometimes when you enter a co-founder relationship, you think it would just figure itself out. You have to actively work on that muscle to build the muscle. And I think you should be thinking about ways in which you can build the relationship with your co-founder that is right for your business, just like you would if you're going to the gym.
That is all today for Women in the Building. I really do hope that you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to drop us any of your own personal stories or questions. You can do that in the reviews or DM us on our socials. I'm Bella, and this podcast was produced by Libo Studio. I'm excited to see you at the next one.